Okay, well, welcome everybody then to this evening's presentation by John Lake, who hopefully you can see on the screen next to me. The Changing Face of Remote Working is our presentation, and John will give his personal insights on what's changed and what he foresees, distilled from his many years on projects involving remote working. Before handing over to John, I just have a few reminders for everybody. Firstly, it's about our future events. On the 20th of January, it's how to set up a PMO, and that's with Lindsay Scott and Arlene Roden. Most of us are using PMOs, but quite a lot of us haven't set them up, so that might be of interest to a lot of people. On the 17th of Feb is our next presentation, and that's called Projects Plus Psychology Equals Success. For those who understand arithmetic and algebra, I'm sure that will mean a lot to them. And anyway, Sharon Damascia is going to present on that, and I think that's going to be very interesting to get a psychological input on projects. And then on the 31st of March, we are targeting our new shape spring school for 2021 as a morning workshop, and it's called Achieving Excellence in Remote Project Management. And you'll see more details coming onto the website over the next month or so. So please try and keep that date free, the 31st of March next year. Secondly, please don't forget to respond to the very short survey at the end of the presentation. You can see the location under the chat section, but I think you'll be sent an email anyway to fill that in. So it's very helpful to us if you can do that. Thirdly, feel free to ask questions of John in the drop-down box provided, and we'll try our best to answer them straight away. But if not, they'll be sent to everybody with John's feedback in due course. Finally, before we start, and to warm you up, we'd like to find out a little more about you with two quick polls. So I'll just launch the first one of those now. Come on, polls, select a poll, right. Right. There it is for everybody to see. We're never sure where people are coming in from, and so we thought this time we'd ask everybody to say. So do click quickly. I can see already that most people are from the UK. We'll give you a few more seconds. 82% of you have voted so far, so we're getting close. Right, I think I'll close it now. And there it is, not a surprise. So it looks like some people are dialing in from another part of Europe. That could all be Ireland, I suppose. But anyway, that's an interesting one. Right. I'll now launch the second one. And the second one is about your main career. We tried this last time, and we think this is very interesting because John may find it useful for his presentation.
Yeah. Quite a selection.
Yeah, about half of you have voted so far. We're up to 70%. Very good. A few more seconds. Is anyone who's going to? We're up to 83. Goodness. What a vigilant lot you all are. Right, I'm going to close it now and share it with everybody. And there you go. Quite a spread, actually. Quite interesting, isn't it?
Yes, it is interesting.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much, everybody, for your feedback on that. I'll hide that now. And I'll hand over to you, John. I'll disappear and leave you to it.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Right. Well, good evening, everybody. It's great to see that we've got so many people joining us this evening on the webinar. It's a webinar which is pretty topical, and that's one of the reasons that I'm interested in doing it. So let's go on to the next slide and we'll see who I am, hopefully, if I can just click in the right place. Right, so why, well, I've already sort of hinted why I'm doing this. I am interested in people's situations at the moment. So my background is in technology and science. I've moved from being an engineer, or let's say scientist to start with, moving into engineering in electronics. I have a degree in electronics, and then later in my career, I became a technical manager, then a project manager, which is what I'm doing at the moment. So you know, it's a career that spanned a number of roles. Why am I doing this again? Well, I'm doing this because I haven't, by the way, done this before. This is a new thing for me, but I have been employed as someone that works either from home or away from the main branch. And I, in fact, had 9 years where I was employed by an overseas organisation, which I'll be talking about, because that introduced some very interesting challenges that I had, and I think that might be a guide for people with the new challenge we have at the moment of remote working being more necessary. I've had roles where I've been based on a site and expected to be there every day, and also roles where I've been allowed to work from home if I wish. I do volunteering mainly with the APM, with a specific interest group on contracts and procurement management for project managers, which is something that I'm interested in. But I'm also interested in anything I can help with from a volunteering perspective. Currently, I am working from home. It's been in the last since actually March this year, where things changed for a lot of us. So I'll go into that a bit later on. So we've got 3 parts to this webinar. Part 1 is the landscape, recent changes, just to give some background. I'm sure most of you know what's happened, just to reiterate some of the things that have happened and how that's affected people. Then going into my observations on technology that's being used at the moment, and really how it's used and how people are migrating towards being able to use it, which is interesting, which brings in some risks and some challenges for people, of course. And then part 3, making it work for you. It's some observations I've had where I think that, you know, because of working remotely, things are different, and therefore you need to ideally work based on those differences being managed. So hopefully I can give some pointers on that. We will endeavour to keep to time. I'm sure you'll be glad to hear. So we will be tackling questions as we go. But if we can't get around all the questions, they will be recorded, and you'll be able to, we will give you the feedback on every question to you. Right. Okay, so the landscape. Yes, of course, it's been a sudden change in our working routine for most people. And these new rules that have come in have affected lives radically, never has it been seen quite the same before, I think, in our lifetimes anyway. And of course, things have changed anyway in our lifetimes, because going back in obviously a century ago, there was nothing like what we've got today in terms of technology. Economic impacts, of course, yes, personal and for the economy in general. Uncertainty, well, yes, that's still around, and we hope that things are going to be improving, particularly, as I say there, with the development of vaccines, which is, I believe, to be a very good news, and we all hope that's going to be rolled out pretty soon. But through the last months, what have we learned? So let's see if we can find that out as I go through. My observations so far are that there were, I mean, people I work with anyway, were rather well equipped for this to happen. They normally went into work, and you hear of, I mean, people really being ill-equipped, i.e., you know, they might have a laptop from work, but they've only got an ironing board to work on. You know, they haven't got a workspace at home. They're not allowed to go into the work at the moment. So it's quite difficult for people. And of course, being isolated from the original workplace is a new challenge. A workplace is a special place for people if they normally go in. There's a lot going on, and you get a lot more insight as to what's going on if you're actually in the presence of people. So it's rather a challenge when you suddenly find yourself remotely working and trying to achieve the normal day's work. So we've realized, and thankfully we had some apps that were around already that were able to be adopted. If this had been 3 or 4 years ago, we might have had much more difficult time in that respect. And these technologies have been adopted, I'm pleased to say, by organizations quite quickly, including government organizations. I actually contract with a government organization at the moment, and they've been very good in terms of the way they've managed it and managing people and rolling out the technologies that are needed to allow us to continue our work as best we can, and also helping people by providing things like monitors additionally for their laptops and that kind of thing. But of course, you know, we're working from home. If that's what we're doing, it's a work-life balance which you didn't necessarily have before, because now you're in the home, and you know, you've got the home things to do, and you don't get isolated from home in your work. And of course, with uncertainty, people don't know how long this is going to last. So, you know, there's quite a few challenges there. So I thought, well, what I'd do is I'd look up some statistics. And the Office of National Statistics has done a paper, and I thought, well, what's actually happened? And if you look at the statistics I put on the screen there, it shows that in April, which is just after the pandemic started, you know, 46 is not even half of the people did work from home, but of those, 86% of those did so as a result of coronavirus. They weren't working at home before. And we've got some other statistics there in terms of the hours worked, which some fewer, some more. Younger people seem to be less likely to work from home. I don't quite know why that is. And occupations requiring higher qualifications and more experience were more likely to provide remote working opportunities. I suppose that covers most of you that are listening in or participating tonight. And here a few more statistics in terms of really confirming that in fact the technical occupations, administrative professional, directors and senior officials, they've been the ones that have been able to work from home more steadily. So a question I have when I read that was, hang on, 86% remote working because of CV-19. Um, some were able to work from home but didn't. So what exactly stops people from working from home? And why do we so much prefer to go into the workplace? Well, some of the things, in my case, I wasn't allowed to work from home until March this year, because I was a contractor working for government, and contractors were only paid if they went into the premises. So I didn't have any choice. I had to go in every day. But since this has happened, I've now been allowed to work from home, which actually for me is easier because I've got all my facilities at home in my home office. I'm fortunate to have that. So it actually works really well. But why didn't people do this earlier? Team interaction, I think, is a really important one, because you've got a communication channel. If you're in the office, you've got far more capability to talk to people around you, etc. You've got your friendship of your colleagues. Work facilities may be very good, and therefore it's a good place to be in the day. And I think it becomes a habit going into work. I think one of the key things for me actually going into work was, if you're starting a job, you need to find out about it, and you need to work with others to do that. If you're going to start and be mostly remotely working, you won't get that opportunity necessarily. And I wonder how people are managing now, where they're changing jobs in this last few months. It's easy to communicate at work. You can see people, you can walk into their office. In some cases it will be, people go in because they get away from the home for a while and they can do something different. And in some cases, employers didn't allow people to work from home because they didn't think they'd work very effectively, skiving. I don't know how prevalent that was, but certainly in my career, there have been times when you are expected to be seen in the office, and I might go into that in more detail. And also the technology, the perception up until now was that it probably was rather flaky, and maybe it wouldn't do the job anyway. So there are pros to working from home and cons. In my case, commuting time and reduced expenses in actually getting there has been quite a big bonus for me, really, to be fair. You can also work, it doesn't matter where in the world you actually work, you can work remotely from there. So that also expands opportunities potentially. Reduced workplace stress. In some places it's almost, there's too many distractions. Saving the environment, I think, yeah, that's got to be good as well. But the other side of it, which I'm probably going to go into in a bit more detail, is isolation. Lost colleague interactions, because you don't have the facility to be able to talk to lots of people at once, or go from 5 minutes to one person to another. Office facilities, as I've mentioned, not necessarily everyone's got those at home. Communications channels themselves are limited for some people, particularly broadband, and also the facilities that might be offered from work. There's potentially a suspicion of not actually doing the work well enough. You might feel, well, I'm not sure people realize how much work I'm doing, and that can cause a stress. And obviously there can be home distractions that you wouldn't have had if you were at work. So I'm going to go into doing a poll C now. So I wonder if you could give me your answers on this. So this is the biggest advantage. So I'm going to launch that. I've got several choices, but of course there could be more, but I'm now going to launch that. I wonder if you could just think for a moment and give me your understanding what you think the best advantages might be in your experience as to what working from home gives you. Time and cost savings really looking good. There's a little while yet before we get a major quorum of you, but it's that's definitely winning. And then ability to live remotely from work, that's looking good. Reduce workplace stress is third. And we're up to 63, 65%. So I think that's getting pretty conclusive now, isn't it? 71. We're looking at time cost savings for companies and employees, ability to live remotely from work, and reduce workplace stress. Thank you very much. If that's okay, I'll close that. Right. Okay, so that one's now closed. So if I go back to my slides, I've got another poll, poll D, biggest disadvantages. So if I can just go to that one, biggest disadvantages, could you possibly give me your opinion on that? Right, it's now been distributed. Thank you, you're voting. And we'll see what people think those are. Obviously, we've got a limited number of things I can put on. I think we've only got 5 that we can use options, so I'd like to put more. But employee isolation, yeah, that's looking like a big one, yeah. And reduced primitive office facilities is in there, communications channel. But I think it's really overall looking like the isolation, lost colleague interaction, which is what to be fair, what I probably would have expected. Very good. Okay, well, we're getting up to a very high number now, so I think that's conclusive. Thank you so much for that. Right, so I can share that. Right, okay, so now, thank you for those polls. That was very interesting indeed. So next thing I wanted to do was look at your questions, if you've sent any in. We don't seem to have that many questions at the moment, as far as I can see on the GoToMeeting, unless I'm not seeing it correctly.
John, can I read out a couple of questions for you?
Oh, yeah, I can't really see them for some reason, so please do.
Right, okay, there's a question from Paul here. It says, why do you think organisations weren't ready for the rapid adoption of remote working, given that technologies have been with us for some time prior to the pandemic? I mean, that's fair enough, isn't it?
Well, yes. Why do I think that? Well, it does. People weren't necessarily using them in normal working life because people were going to work. And yes, the technologies were there, but I don't think they've been tested to the degree that they have now. I mean, I might be wrong, but you know, it's become far more ubiquitous use of those technologies recently because of the pandemic. And people that wouldn't have used them previously, it's the only way they could really get their jobs done and communicate well. So I think it's probably a test of them in terms of, you know, them being effective, which we hadn't had before, because of course there was use of them, but it wasn't as ubiquitous as it's become. And I'm quite surprised how good they are, to be honest. They seem to be, you know, the bandwidth seems to be working really well. Obviously, there's a lot of compression involved, and you know, they are standing up much more than I expected. I don't know whether that is a good enough answer, but that's my understanding.
It could also, I suppose, John, be something like, you know, a reaction to change. You know, don't want to change unless you have to, you know.
I agree, and that's quite normal, really, for people. You know, they've got a way of working, and you know, introducing new ways of working is obviously quite, you know, it can be quite a difficult thing because people prefer, you know, what they know.
I've got another question here from Peter Leeson.
Okay.
A big disadvantage of remote working is loss of serendipitous conversations, you know, at the coffee machine, for instance. Yeah.
I absolutely agree. And I think that is the thing that's different, which I'm going to go on to actually, is that in the office you've got a massive richness of communication, haven't you? You can hear everything that's around you. You can see people all the time. You can see how other people are working. the side chats, you know, the coffee machine chats. It's not the same. You can't easily replicate that, or I haven't seen it replicated yet in terms of the apps that we have now. At the moment, I mean, things will change as time goes on, no doubt. But yeah, it's the rich. I do agree. It's the richness that you get. All your senses are able to bring in a sense of what's going on, what the mood is of the office. You know, if there's people are happy and everything's going well, you know, you don't get that unless you're really in the office. And same with meetings. You know, sometimes you have meetings with people, it could be quite tense because you know, maybe something, the decision needs to be made, but you get that tenseness and the reaction of the people immediately. I know Zoom can do this as well, you know, but it's kind of, there's more to it than that. There's side chats, so it's the richness. I agree of being in a workplace is different to replicate. It's difficult to replicate.
Right.
Anything else?
Do you want to take some more questions, John, or do you want to move on and come to these at the end?
I'm just looking at my time plan now, and I reckon I probably do need to move on. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
But good questions. Thank you. So what I'll do, if it's okay, I'll go on to the next stage. So my observations, and I think we might have covered some of these already. Some of the remote working risks and my experiences of them. And as an example, one time I was working for a foreign located company in Toronto, but based in Southampton. But all the people I was dealing with, i.e. my peers and my sort of team leader person I reported to, were overseas. So, you know, I couldn't see them very often. And, you know, we had basically rather primitive communications at that time, you know, emails and phone. I know it's better now, but I wasn't able to kind of just be with them all the time. So I at that time, I was there for 9 years doing this. And, you know, the experience I had was very, it gave me I had to change my ways of working, is what I'm getting at, which is probably, although not quite the same today because we've got a bit better technology, but I think some of that ways of working will need to change just to be able to make sure we get the best out of our work and are able to contribute the best we can. So I was in the UK and I had a small division of about 40 people that I was responsible for in the UK, but I had to, everything I had to, all the decisions I had to get were overseas. So that was the important part of my job. So the interesting thing was, you know, the early months, when you haven't actually seen people in you know, that you're working with and actually got to know them, and you're on a phone call maybe with 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 of them on a conference call. It's very difficult to know what they're like, what they're thinking, and it needs a proper meeting to get to know people, and maybe more than one meeting. And I can remember sort of trying to gauge how they were thinking about, you know, when I was talking, whether I was actually you know, communicating with them with what I needed to, and getting over the fact that I was quite needing to get some decisions at that particular time. The other thing about it was the company culture, of course. See, how do you know what that is until you actually go and meet more people? What are the politics like? What are others' ambitions? You know, the people that your peers, how are they moving in their career? Where are they going? What are their motivations? And what is this big picture? You know, what is the company? Where's it going? You know, where are we ending up? I found that because I was British and I hadn't worked for a Canadian North American company before, the culture was so different. in terms of the risk nature. We tend to be a bit staid, I think, over here compared to some other parts of the world. And you know, that really came over to me, and I had to really think about how I would manage that, because I would seem to be a bit staid, but you know, I needed to fit in with the way that things were done, and that took quite a bit of time and quite a few visits over there to see people. So I don't think you can very easily just work remotely. You've really got to have a combination of meeting people in the workplace. The other thing that was important was decisions. You know, you don't know what other conversations have been had necessarily in other meetings that you might not have been in. How do you react and influence matters if something comes up and you find, well, I didn't really want it to go that way. You know, and you might be on a, I suppose you're on a Zoom with about 10 people or something. You got to make your point somehow, but not upsetting the apple cart. You know, you've got to sort of pick your moment. How do you do that? Where, you know, how do you do that effectively without coming over like you're, you know, ordering them around, if you like. And also how you sustain your value to the organization if people don't see you so much. You know, how do they know how well you're doing, and how do you communicate that? My finding was, I was always thinking, well, how am I thought of? Am I actually delivering? And I used to do, you know, preparation a lot for meetings in order that I could, when I went to see them, I could actually show that I'd thought about everything in advance. So I think that's something that comes in to when you're working remotely, that you tend to start thinking, when I meet somebody, what am I going to say? How, you know, what are my main points? So yeah, that was what I found there. But it all worked out really well after a few years. So coming on to communications. Today we've got not only the original types of communication there, email, phone, mobile phone, we've got some quite good applications which give us more capability to get information, work together, which is really useful. But also there are all these other apps, if you like, you know, social media, things that are going on outside of the workplace, and it's almost like there's too much, potentially too much communication, and it's important that we use it in the right way in order to get the results that we need. And it is important you have certain levels of these apps that allow you to do things efficiently rather than you know, haphazardly. So what you know, this is a bit basic, but I think there are certain attributes that you need to have in the technology that you use in order to do the best job. So top of the list, I think, is some way of making sure your communications are in fact secure. So it's not going to be listened in. I don't know how good the apps are at that, although in the government organization I've been working in, they're very good, of course, because there's some pretty important decisions being made over the air. Therefore, there's encryption, and it's all being worked out by the IT department and made sure that we only talk at the appropriate level. But there are other organizations that may not be as, let's say, definitive about that. So that's something I think you need to keep in your mind when you are using these apps, as to, you know, can somebody be listening in? Well, we don't know. File share, simple, but rather than sending stuff around on email, it really is useful to have file shares so that you're not sending lots of information unnecessarily. We use SharePoint. That seems to work really well. I've also used Dropbox, which I use mainly for my APM volunteering. And rather than sending documents across the air, we park them somewhere. Sufficient bandwidth. I'm quite surprised how good the bandwidth is at where I live, because it comes down a wire between telegraph poles, but it seems to work pretty well. I didn't think it would be that good for video, but it does need to be sufficient. A chat facility, we've got Cisco Jabber at work, which is very good because you can just, what we say, jabber somebody and just send them a little message, get something over to them fairly quickly without writing a spiel, a long email, and it really works well, and they get back to you pretty quickly if they're around, and you can see whether they are in fact in the office or not. I also think multi-screen is important, particularly if you're working, well, most people are working with a lot of information on the screen. I do a lot of big spreadsheets, and I wouldn't, one of the reasons that I went into work early recently was because there were some desks that had large screens and some that weren't, that didn't. So, you know, it was getting in to get a decent screen on the day was quite an important thing, because I couldn't work from home at that time. So now I've got, you know, a larger screen at home, I can work just as efficiently as I could at work. So I think it's important that those facilities are available. And of course, comfort, you know, because you're going to be working at home for some considerable time potentially, and you've got to make sure that your facilities are okay. These wireless mice are good. Make sure your posture's okay and that kind of thing. Mobile phone compatibility is also good because people do move around, obviously, but I think security could be an issue on that. I know mobile phones are not as secure as landlines, and indeed, well, I guess the internet, but it depends what encryption you have on that. So let's talk about video conferencing software. I've got a poll on that. I'd like to see what you prefer to use. Obviously, we can only pick 5 of them. So let me see if I can get your I'm just getting the polls up at the moment. That's closed. Sorry, I'm just trying to find the polls. I don't know why I can't see them. Biggest disadvantage. Oh, here we go. Preferred video conferencing. Okay, so I'm going to launch that. So I agree it's only a snapshot of some of these applications, but it'd be interesting to know what people think in terms of what they find the best. So we got Zoom and Microsoft Teams coming up there. That's interesting, Microsoft Teams. And actually Microsoft Teams seems to be winning over Zoom, but Zoom's pretty close behind. So I think, yeah, that's good, because obviously people do like those particular apps, and they're obviously doing their job. So that's really useful. Thank you very much for all those that have voted. That's good. Right, so back to the slides. As I said earlier, and I think it was alluded to, sorry, I'm just looking at the side panel there. It was alluded to earlier that the communications that you get when you're in a building with other people where you're working is far richer than what you've got when you're working remotely. And that's, you know, even with these apps, that's true. And that does create some barriers, doesn't it? I mean, you know, you can't just go and walk over to someone and say hello and sort of get their opinion on something so easily. You've got to go via some other way, whether it's a chat line or whether it's, you know, Zoom, or you create a meeting. It's a lot more effort to get information. The communications channels are not as good. You have such a richness in the office, and what this means is that you don't you don't necessarily get enough information about what's going on, because you're specifically working on something, and that will be what you're looking at on that day. But if you were in the office, you would be able to, walk away from your desk, go and talk to someone else, find more something completely different, and then be looking at that. So it gets more difficult to work from a remote location because of that. And how do you work when you can't do those things? There's got to be an efficient way of doing it, but it isn't the same. So there is a need to look at the way that you work in order to best use these narrow channels that you have. And so it's important that I think people get some education in this area. I mean, it's obviously will come with time. When people are doing this, they'll find ways, but I think it's important that there are certain techniques you can use to get information using the technology we have now. And but it isn't going to be as rich as when you were in the office, which brings me to the point where I do think that we will still need to work in the office once it's able to occur. And in fact, people with social distancing can go into the office now, and obviously there aren't so many seats and so on, but that's a very important part of working, and I think that needs to carry on in the future, although not necessarily every day that you go into the office. So it's the other thing I put on this slide is regarding added value. You are seen to be doing your job in the office. If you're not in the office, they can't necessarily see you, not easily. Unless you're in a meeting of some sort. How do you know you're being appreciated for your added value? It's easier in company of others. They can see the way you work. You can see, you're at your desk, whether your techniques of working. You're talking to many more people, possibly training people as well as you go along. It's a more rich communication channel. Working remotely, of course, that isn't necessarily so easy. So how do you know that your added value in the company is appreciated? That's a question, and hopefully I can give you some clues as to how that might be able to be put across. So yeah, what can go wrong? Getting your points across. I found that there is a range of abilities, as I was saying there, in the management of remote communications. People don't necessarily chirp up. There are some people that like the limelight. I mean, you get this anyway in an office, of course, but they're tempered by the fact that you can talk to them fairly quickly and show what you're thinking, and talk. You can temper it. But when you're on one of these conference calls, it isn't quite so easy to butt in. I found this when I was doing, working for the Canadian company. People would be talking, putting their points over in these meetings, which were quite limited in time. And I had to pick my time and my point to make to get in and actually take some of the limelight, if you like, away. It's not as easy if you're not in the same room in a meeting. You've got people can actually think you're too overbearing if you keep butting in, or you keep contradicting somebody. So there's a technique of managing it amongst a range of abilities in people that are on the calls, and of also appreciating that they should have some of the limelight too. So the people that tend to take the limelight perhaps may need to think, well, have we got all of the views here? And how does Fred think about it? We need to get everybody's view. So that's quite important to understand, that people may not have a chance to talk, and we need to allow them to. It's also possible that you might put a point across and it's completely taken the wrong way, and you don't know. It's not so easy to know that, and that can cause a few issues because people go off thinking you've said something and you meant a particular thing, and in fact it wasn't really what you were saying, but you weren't able to communicate it very well. Has everybody got the same conclusion? It's a bit easier to see if the people are in the room. You can see their eye contact, whether they're smiling. I suppose Zoom gives you this to some extent, but then you've got, like, you're not looking across people in a room. You're kind of got these little pictures of them, and you probably focus on one at a time, and it's not so easy to see how people are taking what you're saying, and getting the wrong impression could end up being a difficult thing to get right, because people will go off and do things and not what you wanted, or maybe against what you were trying to do. So it means that there needs to be an etiquette in meetings, that and be aware that people do actually need to get the right impression. So my conclusion is that in the future, when we have a bit more normality, I think remote working should carry on and should be able to be done, but the physical meetings are important to get those points across and to be able to understand others' views. So the other thing is that it becomes more important when if you're doing both meetings where it's remote and meetings where you're actually physically with the people. The meetings where you meet up with them, the team, are much more important, because you get a chance then to make your point a bit more easily and more sort of persuasively, if you like. And therefore, what I found was when I went over to Toronto to, be part of a big meeting and try and in fact get some more sort of investment to be able to do some more work, it was really, I had to prepare a lot more for those meetings. It was important. Those meetings become more important. So I think as time goes on, we'll do a lot of remote working and a lot of remote meetings, but the ones where the decisions are made, where you actually physically are with people, will become more important, and you tend to do more preparation, and you tend to look at what you're expecting, what you think their expectation, and indeed find out what their expectations are. So I think those meetings will be extremely important. So let's do another poll, if I can get the technology to work as I would like. Right, so let me see, polls. Sorry, I'm very slow at this, polls. Oh yeah, I've got it now. So this is highest risk when getting your point across. I've just closed it. Oh dear, sorry about that. I can't give you that poll. I apologize. The menu is, I'm not familiar with it, but we can do that well, maybe another time, but I'll try and be careful on the next one. So there are some risks, and it would be good to have got your input. Those risks that I was going to put up were loss of eye contact and presence, people's varying abilities of using remote working, poor meeting etiquette, people's differing objectives for meetings, and or none of the above. What do I think? I think probably it's the eye contact and presence that I would probably go for. So let's see if there's any questions. And David, could you do what you did before and see if there are any?
Yeah, I'm back again. We've got about quite a lot of questions still outstanding. We'll try and tackle a few of them now, if we may. One of these is a comment actually from Emubor, if I can say it correctly. He's just saying, he's saying, or she's saying, they're using WebEx since 2013, just underlining the fact that the technology's been there already.
Okay.
Apaze says, I wonder if John corrected for the effect of IR35. Out of 46% of people who could work from home, only 86% did after COVID, and wonders whether 14% they lost their jobs due to IR35. I'm not sure you've got the info for that.
Yeah, well,
that.
I do know about IR35 because I was kind of affected by it, because when I started working for this government organisation as a contractor, I started out with my own little company, and was able to you know, put invoices in and that kind of thing, and then this IR35 came in, and of course then I've had to go through an umbrella company, which means, you know, they do a lot of the work in terms of, you know, how they pay tax and so on, but it does mean that, you know, it's basically not as, it's not as lucrative as it might have been before, you know, and it really, to me, it means that I don't feel like I'm a contractor anymore, you know, because I've got the same as everyone else. The risk level, I suppose, is the same, because I've not got the employment contract that a lot of other people have, but I've still got to pay, you know, the tax that everyone else does, and not necessarily considered in the same way as others. For example, as I was saying earlier, I wasn't allowed to work from home because I wouldn't be paid unless I went to the office. So I don't know, in terms of your question, does that mean that people might have lost their jobs? Well, if that's the question, quite possibly, because people may not appreciate that people that are on contract, or clearly on contract, are maybe have a day's or a week's notice, and, you know, could be the people that, if they are slimming down, might go first, and it would have an effect, certainly, but the main thing, I think, in terms of what's happened for me, is that I have been allowed to work from home now, and you know, I feel that that is a more equitable thing, because you know, I'm a conscientious worker. Just because I'm a contractor doesn't mean that I don't do my work you know, the same as everyone else. I don't know if that answers it, but
yeah, I think it's a difficult one, because you've got to have the stats to know, haven't you?
probably,
so maybe we'll
yes. I
don't find out that you know, later. Next one is from Geraldine. Do you have studies showing the remote working adoption in different countries? Again, I'm not sure whether you have that information.
I don't, but it's a good question, and you've made me think about how to get that, because I was looking for statistics. The ones I've showed from the Office of National Statistics are something what you might think is credible. You know, they've got a reputation. They need to find these statistics and do it properly. Whereas I think a lot of, if you go online, and I did a bit of, you know, browsing online to see what statistics there were around, and you think, well, is that really, you know, how well has that been researched? So I would like to know that from an international perspective. However, I wonder where I would look to get that. You might be best to go out and just go for lots of different sets of statistics and see if there's a correlation across them, which would probably take a little bit of time to do. But yeah, it would be a very useful thing, and, you know, interesting thing to know. And it's something perhaps I might even look up, because yeah, it would be interesting how the cultural differences work, because I've experienced different culture in the North American style of life, and, you know, it will have an effect on how people, you know, where they work, how well they adapt into if they have to go remote working, yeah, it would be a useful thing to know. I haven't been able to get a set of statistics on that, but it's a good question.
Okay, I'll follow on. Geraldine has another one, sort of a bit different to that one. Is the chat at the coffee machine time wasted? Could we work less hours because we don't have to think about the time we would have spent at doing other things?
That is an interesting point. I suppose the thing is, if you're going to have a break, then you're going to have a break, aren't you? So, I mean, unless you spend all your time at the coffee machine or wherever, you're going to have that break anyway. It's a matter of that. The advantage might be of that break is that you get more information from somebody. This is another area where we are not machines. We do need to have ways, times away from the screen, away from, and what I found, through a few of my appointments, is that at a lunchtime I'd go out of the office and go for a walk just to get completely away, to just sort of have a time away from the screen and give yourself a chance to sort of take it easy for a short while. And I was refreshed far more in going back to my work, In fact, now while I'm working from home, I will often go out for about half an hour walk at lunch just around the area and just sort of get some fresh air, and then come back and I feel a lot better, and I can get on with my work. And I think that should be encouraged rather than thought of as, you're not actually working, because you can't work, well, you can work all hours. I mean, I used to work very long hours when I had a job where I was responsible for people and needed to get results. And I used to work from home. I used to work in the office late. It was a tough thing, and it didn't do me any good, really. I think you've got to get away. It's not, you're not a machine. And companies and organizations need to realize this, that people it will be more efficient if they get a rest from work some of the time. And this was also something to do with remote working, because if you start feeling stressed out, you may think, well, I've still got to work because I've got to show that I'm working. I mean, I think there are apps, aren't there, for some companies where they look at whether you're still pressing the keyboard, or I've heard of that. I mean, it's not really, you've got to allow people breaks. And I've always really worked on the premise of trust, where I think when you take people on, if you don't trust them, well, that's a big thing. It needs to be, people need to be able to be trusted. And obviously the performance should show that. One of the reasons why interviews really need to be in person. You get a feeling about the person when you're talking to them. So I think the coffee machine thing, well, I think I've learned things which I wouldn't have known otherwise, because there's a little kitchen at work where you go in and you can make yourself a cup of tea or coffee, and you talk to people there, and you might be talking work. I mean, I've talked work there. I think I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, unless clearly people are just only doing that sort of thing. I don't know if that answers. It's probably rather a roundabout answer, but I hope it does.
We've got quite a few questions still outstanding. Good. So I don't know whether you want to quickly address one or two of those.
Yes, I think we've got time, because section 3, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So let's try and quickly get through some of these. Then this one is from Peter, saying, "Do you agree that the employer should help remote workers get an appropriate work environment? Desk chair, secure connection, etc."
Yes. Absolutely.
So that's a quick answer, that one.
Well, I can give you an example, because working for the government department, although I don't get it, I'm a contractor, but the employees, they've been able to order chairs and extra monitors and that kind of thing, which makes their workplace more pleasant. And I think that's a necessity for any, whatever it's a government establishment or commercial establishment. It's necessary that your workers are able to do their job well. I mean, if I didn't have multiple screens, I don't know if I could do my job. It's really important. I've got several things that I'm looking at once. It's very efficient doing it that way. So it actually does save. Well, I've paid for them. I'm a contractor, but it has saved the company money, the fact that I've got all those facilities.
Yeah. Well, I've got one similar question. Well, it's sort of related to that from Avaze. It says, I really miss having a whiteboard to communicate ideas. Have you got a recommendation to replace a whiteboard?
Yes, there are such things. I'm trying to think of the name of the one that we use on our. We've got. I work. Well, it's not really work. It's volunteering, but it's for the Association for Project Management, and I do this specific interest group. I'm a secretary, and we have a group of people on the committee, and we do various events where we give lectures and so on. And recently we've had a change in the committee. Some new people have come in, and they've introduced these kind of new apps that we're using. Like there's a whiteboard one. In fact, I can probably find out, and when we answer these questions later,
Yeah.
I can give you some hints there. But to be fair, I can't remember what it's actually called. But there are several. But this was quite a good one. It's like a post-it, kind of post-it note thing.
Yeah. Some of these questions, quite rightly, you'll perhaps be able to give a bit more information, when you fill in the answers later.
Yes.
Next one, I've got Paul here. He's saying that he uses Teams because work approved, and that's the one that they want to use. And he has to use Zoom for external training. So, there's a case where someone is having to use two systems. And I'm sure there are plenty of other people who are in the same boat, including us poor folk at BCS. We're using different systems. Next one from Peter. When doing knowledge-based work, doesn't the loss of regular interruptions more than compensate for the inability to walk over and have a chat with a colleague?
Yeah, good question. And yes, there's definitely
swings and roundabouts, isn't it?
swings and roundabouts. I think I would say that it's still important to have in-person, teamwork, and ideally in an office. I think, because I think it's the way I see it. I'm giving you the sort of answer that I'm coming to at the end, is I don't think things are going to be totally remote working, and I hope, to be frank, that they're not going to be totally office working in the future, because people need to be trusted to do work using the facilities elsewhere. But it is, I think, yes, I know what you mean about getting interrupted, and maybe you were in the middle of doing something, and then you found that, oh gosh, someone's, I've got to do something else, or they're being noisy or whatever. But I found in one of my appointments that we had a little production department, and I didn't really know what was going on in there after the time, because I was so busy doing other things. Anyway, the supervisor used to come storming into my office and say, "Hey, this is happening and this is happening," and she was the best one, because she wasn't afraid to come and tell me, to find things out. Sometimes it's better to be with people and sort of get that sort of information from them, because they really need to tell you. And I think if you're in an office environment, it can help in that way. Although I do agree, you can get distractions, and it can reduce your efficiency potentially.
Right. after that, I maybe want to move on with the rest of the presentation, and then we'll perhaps, if we've got time at the end, we'll answer some more of these questions.
Sure.
A fair number
By all means.
have started to appear.
Okay. Oh, very good. I'm glad there are. Okay, so going on to the next section, it's the future. Well, my vision of the future, maybe, but making it work for you is my thought here, because how much training has there been available on this in the past? Probably some, but I think more may be needed. So the things that occur to me, if you're going to be remote working for any period of time, things change in companies and organizations, all the time, really. And you may not, I mean, if you think back, if you've been remote working like me since sort of March time on this particular assignment I have, I mean, to be fair, the organization I'm working for is very good with information flow out on their website and stuff like that. So that's really good. I don't think every organization's that good at that. So what happens is, people change in their positions. Some structural changes may well have occurred more because of the pandemic, because of the needs of companies to change. How do you know what those are? You've got to go out and seek it. If you're not in an office where it's given to you, or you have other means, you've really got to make efforts to find out, I think. And that is not so easy if you're at the end of a Zoom or an email structure or a phone call or whatever. Who do you ask and when do you ask? And the other thing here is your job may have changed, and maybe it's quite a big change, but you didn't know that, because maybe you're reporting to a different person. You have like a sponsor. If you're working, there's somebody that's taken you on. Usually, like I have a sponsor because I'm a contractor. They decide they're going to pay me. Those people, you need to know who they are and keep in touch with them. I'm not saying you wouldn't do that normally. It's just something that I think it's more an emphasis on it when you're away from a workplace and you don't see them every day. Performance reviews, well, be ready. Make sure that you take account of what you've done and any highlights, lowlights, ideally highlights. But we do a thing where it's not personnel highlights, but it's highlights on the projects. We highlight some lowlights, what's happened and what hasn't happened. Those things get reported on. But for yourself, as a remote person, a remote worker, you need to be making sure that your good points are put over. Training, well, yes, what sort of training will you get? If you are in a workplace, it's almost like every day you learn something. You're talking to people, things happen. But then ideally, if you need something to learn something new, then you need to go out and make sure you get that training, and ask where you need it, analyze where you perhaps do need some training, and make that point. And I think what I'm coming on to later is that, in fact, training in how to do this remote working, because it isn't the same, and there are things you can do, which I'm alluding to now, but I'm not necessarily the expert. I'm just giving you my views and my experience. Make sure you've got your key contacts and you keep in touch with them, just give them a call or a jabber, or if they call it a jabber, which is a sort of a text capability, and just keep in touch. So the other things, I think, if you go online, you'll see these when you look at what remote working requirements are. Your workplace becomes much more important at home, and you need to make sure that you segregate your life accordingly, because it isn't so easy things can intrude on what you're doing. So if you've got a work, you need to have a workspace, if possible, away from the family, and make sure that that's allocated accordingly, and it's your workspace so that you are able to use it, and it's got the things that you need. So the next thing the thing that I've found during my career is way I work, and the thing that I've always used in the last several years is the Deming cycle, which is it was invented for purpose of quality management and finding problems in production lines originally, but it still works for practically everything in your work. And it's a cycle where you do your planning, and you don't always necessarily plan your work. It comes into you, and whatever comes in on the day, but ideally you need to be able to make that into your plan and look for what's coming in the future. Do whatever work you do, but check it, go through it yourself, if possible get it reviewed, and make sure that it's up to standard. And of course, if it isn't, make the necessary adjustments and then go round the loop again. And it might seem very simple, but I find that process, even let's say project management, you've got a project where you've got maybe some subcontractors or contractors that are working some work for you, and they need to produce outputs back to you. What you need to make sure of is that you've planned what they're going to do. When they do the work, check it and make sure they make any adjustments. And that's the same for when you've got in-house work that you're doing. It's like a system that you then know how you're going to work. Ideally, you could have a time in the day when you do your planning, and then you've got a time when you actually get on and complete that part of the work, but then always check it afterwards as best you can. I've got people that I work with in my current role, and they send stuff to me to get it checked, because if you've got a spreadsheet where it's got lots and lots of figures, some of which are very large, small errors can actually make quite a difference. So it's very important that you make sure the quality of what you're doing is up to standard, and don't be afraid to tell people that things need to change, and they haven't done it correctly. It's a sort of a thing I think it can be in your mind. It's like I've planned that, I've done it, I've worked, I've checked it, and now I've made the necessary adjustments. Now it can go on. So I do think that's a way, if you're maybe a little bit unstructured which I've been in the past, that really does help to bring it home. So these are the sorts of things that you get, that you can find as advice. And I just wanted to show you the key things that people are saying about remote working. These are all good tips, really. Your workspace, like I was saying, make sure it's comfortable enough as best you can. Your boundaries of where your work is and where it's not your work. We've got children, of course. That's going to be quite an important one to manage, and it might be quite different if you're working from home, particularly where we've had the pandemic and schools are being closed, and it's been a very tough time for a lot of people. But if you can, let's hope the schools can carry on and enable the children to study and be able to have some time in a school rather than at home. Maintain a consistent routine. I think that's a good thing. Each day, look at what's coming in, what's important, prioritize things. This word over communicate, I think, is an important one. Make sure your points get across to people, be more more specific in what your communications are, so that there's as little as possible error, so that people realize exactly what you mean, rather than leaving it nuanced, where they could take several ideas from what you might have said, try and be as precise as you can. And connected, well, try and keep connected with your normal colleagues if possible. I mean, these chat lines that you have in the apps are quite good for that. Maybe you should have kind of meetings where it's not really necessarily a work meeting. I mean, we have these with the government department I'm in now. They have like a sort of a morning, I think it's every Monday morning, where it's just everyone gets online and talks to each other, which is quite nice. As I said earlier, do take breaks. It will make you more efficient, not just always at the screen. Physical and creative activities outside of work, you know, you can be so concerned about your work that those things go to the side. It's a work-life balance that you need to create and keep. And the very big one is the big picture. Where is your organization going, do you think? You know, are you kind of on the curve there? You know, that's one thing I was trying to work out when I was working for a foreign owned company, is like, what is going to happen? And there were things that I found out rather late that I wish I'd have known earlier, like that when they actually ended up selling the company, the whole company, to another one, which was the last company I wanted them to sell it to. But, you know, those sort, I wish I'd have made more, let's say, had more questions and been more forward, let's say, into what was going on in the company. So try and get that big picture of what's going on. Not so easy remotely, much more easy if you can just go and talk to a few people around the place. But I think that's important. So, a poll. Now I'll try and get this right this time. Sorry about this. How best to overcome limitations of remote working. So this is, I've got it. So I'm going to launch that now. And there are some choices there as before. 0% voted. Oh, we've got maintaining your own work discipline. Right. Over communicates, looking good. Additional efforts to stay connected. Maintaining your own work discipline. They're all about equal, those three. And we've got over half people who have voted. And it's still looking like over communicate, additional efforts to stay connected, and maintaining your own work discipline is winning. With the fourth place, know your own motivations and career. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, very good. Okay, so I think that one we've got an answer on, so I'll close that one now, if that's okay. There's a few more going in, but I think I'll close that one now. So that's great. Thank you. So that was interesting. Some of the things I've been talking about seem to have hit home, and you know, people, hopefully they were thinking these things already. So the last, I believe this is the last poll. I will try and get this right. Right, what would most help your performance at remote working? So here it goes. I'm launching that now. So it's working. Good. Right. Oh, improved RW training for company managers. Yeah, good one. That's coming out of halfway, half of you so far. And you know, and further down the scale would be investment in remote facilities and more RW techniques training for you, which is, I think that's what I would agree with, to be fair. But the interesting one is improved RW training for company managers, so that I can fully understand that. So I think we've got 62% voted, and it's not going up at the moment. So the result there is very interesting. Improved training for managers, so that they can appreciate what you're doing in remote working and the challenges that there are for people. I think that's a really good point. Glad we did that poll. I'll close that now. So just to sort of recap on my thoughts, I think that it will become more normal for people to work at home, and I hope it does, because yes, it means that people need to have facilities at home, but it does save the environment. You know, when I used to, I didn't go and work in London, but I used to go on the train up to London to meetings and so on. And you know, the number of people that have that journey every day, commuting, it doesn't seem necessary to me. You know, I know it's very good to be in the office, but there's got to be a better way of doing it. And it could be that they just felt they couldn't do their work effectively without going to the office. I have found that where I was employed by a large organization at one time as a project manager, and I was actually, my contract said I worked from home, but I worked at several premises of that company, and I found that because of the nature of the work, I need to learn about that particular project and be able to manage the people on it. And I found myself, I needed to go in initially to get a grasp of what was needed, but I didn't. I just stayed. Kept going in to work, and you know, I was commuting like an hour and a half each way at one point. And you know, I look back now, I think, well, I didn't really need to do that. It's just that it just seemed the, well, easy way out, if you like. But I would have been better now looking back, that I would have had maybe 2 days in the office, and I could just have done a lot of work either via some, you know, communication thing, you know, we have now and have had for some years, where we actually talk to people in that way rather than in the office. So I think that it will be a benefit that people might have learned, that it's not necessary to have that that journey every day. And I think the normality should be a combination of the two, and will be. I might be wrong. It might go all back, you know, once the pandemic is eventually over. You know, maybe it will just go back as it was. We would like to think that you get investment in your home office, because at least then they're using less electricity and so on, which can be very expensive in offices, for the infrastructure that they have to provide in the office. You know, it saves money. Commonplace using of video conference apps. Well, video conferencing a few years ago was a special thing where you had to buy a very expensive piece of software to be able to get proper coverage for video conferencing, whereas now it's an app. You know, you just have it on your desktop, and it works. So it should be commonplace, and why not? You know, it's very useful. And you know, if you have a combination of working where you're in person, sometimes the video conferencing can be more useful, because you're doing specifics, but you're still getting the presence of what's going on in the office. I think the security side of that, I think we've heard that Zoom has had some issues in that area, and probably other apps, but that will improve. It has to, so that will be good too. I think also perhaps higher speed, the rollout of higher speed to rural parts of the country will also help. So what we said earlier, and just what people were saying was that, you know, more training given to help with remote working efficiency and reduce the risks, and that's a management style issue, which I'm pleased to say there was a lot of agreement on. It's not just what you do; it's how you're managed and how your manager treats you. And as I say, there's got to be, I think, in any relationship in terms of work or otherwise, but certainly in a workplace, there's got to be a level of trust. Without that, I think it's very difficult to get efficiency from people. And you know, I feel I'm very trustworthy in what I do, and I try to make sure that people know that. You know, I always answer back to things, questions that come in, problems that people send in. I try and get that back to them so that they know I'm not dismissing it, or not, you know, not prepared to take the time on it. Very good to have training in that area. So we're doing your thoughts by a GoToMeeting on the questions. So perhaps if there's any more questions to use up the time.
Right, John, I'm back again.
Okay.
So I'm going to pose one or two of the questions to you that we've got. Obviously, you'll answer all of them, you know, in due course.
Yes, absolutely.
So the one I want to pose now, if I can just find it again quickly. Yes, it's not a question actually. This is input from Peter Leeson, who's actually provided a link for finding out about remote working globally. So we'll obviously send that to people later. Yes. I'm not going to read it out because it's all percentages and God knows what in it.
Oh, fair enough.
So that one's,
we'll send it out.
Yeah, we'll send that one out. The next one is, yes, this is one from Ian Lowry. Before COVID, I had a tough time with the CEO when allowing my managers to work from home. Excuse me. I wonder how much this will have changed post-COVID. Yes, looking in the crystal ball.
Yeah, well, I think that is a form of question, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And I think that it will. I think it might have given some enlightenment to managers, because it's an experience. Sometimes life experience is the best way for people to learn, you know, in the way and understand how people are resilient and able to manage some unforeseen circumstances. And you know, that's what makes us such what, you know, how the human race has survived through the many thousands of years. But you know, it's sometimes an event, and I'm hoping this will be the case. An event like this, the good of it can come from what people have learned through this period, and that in fact we end up in a better place overall, notwithstanding the terrible things that have happened along the way with the pandemic. And it's not been a welcome thing by any means, but let's take the best out of it, and I hope we do. And I think training on being able to use these, you know, these remote working capabilities is a really good one.
Right, thank you. The next one is that a couple of people have mentioned the Miro whiteboard. So that's obviously one of the things that
Miro board. Yes, that's the one I was thinking of. That's right. What our new committee members in fact the new chair of the SIG I'm a member of in the APM, he's proponing that, and we're learning to use it because he's asking us to put stuff on the Miro board for when we have our committee meetings. So yes, that is the one that I've used, and I believe it is one of the best as well.
Right. Geraldine mentions one excuse me, called Mural. So I don't know if that's a competitor to Miro.
Probably.
That's another one.
That's another one we can circulate. As I mean, the thing is, you've got to be careful because obviously we're not actually promoting these products of companies. We're just these are
awareness.
examples. We don't we're not working for those companies.
Yeah. Next question from Peter. The north of England and villages is suffering because young people have to go to London to find a good job. Do you believe that this is going to change?
I sincerely hope so. I think there are signs that it may well do, because they're talking about government moving their departments out of London now. I think that politicians that decide on these things, I know we've got the new rail line that will improve communications northwards and south, from north to south. But I think in practice, people shouldn't, in today's world, need to migrate like that. I mean, yes, there's a lot of business that goes on in London, but it also goes on, further afield. And I think that let's hope that things get distributed out a bit more in order that we save all that necessity to move around, whether it's on moving your house to that area and probably paying a lot more than you would have done, and it's a very big strain on the budget doing that, of course. Why? You might much prefer not to do that. I worked in London for a few years, and I didn't particularly like it. I'd rather I'm sort of more rural, but there's still work around. But we shouldn't have to go to London always to get these jobs. So I sincerely hope and think it will probably change.
Good. I think that's a good point to stop on the questions, John.
Okay.
And I don't know if there's anything else you want to say to round up at all.
Well, I really think I've kind of tried to cover as much ground as I can, and it's not an easy subject, because I've had to actually think quite deeply about what to say about it, which I hadn't really thought in that way before, and look back at any experience that I've had. But I'd just like to say thank you to everyone for the support you've given for this evening's event, and taking your valuable time to attend and to give us your feedback and the questions. It really does make it worthwhile for me, and I'm glad that I've been able to. This is the first time I've done this particular type of presentation. It's usually on subjects that I've known about for years, and I hope you've got some value out of it, and I wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and we hope that it will be happier as time goes on. But, thank you.
John, I would like to add my personal thanks for all the effort that you put in to researching this, and obviously having to deal with the irony of a remote webinar to discuss remote working issues, and for fielding a range of questions for people to think about, and hope our attendees have found some useful suggestions in there, and I'm sure they have. So once again, thanks very much, John. A round of applause from me, and I hope from everybody else. So let's close it off there, shall we?
Yes,
reminding everybody to fill their questionnaire in. Okay.
Yes, thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, and we'll feed back on the questions.
Indeed, that's right.
As we have done in previous webinars.
Yes, absolutely. Lovely. Okay, well, thanks very much, everybody, then.